Hello, everyone. This is Lynn from Yoga Story Express, the podcast from Yoga Story in downtown Bentonville in Northwest Arkansas. And today I'm with our guest, Mandy Ryle. Hi, Mandy.
Hello.
Just a little backstory of why I've got Mandy on today. Mandy is a teacher who also does teacher trainings, and she's going to do a Yin and Somatics teacher training at our studio. But even further back in the backstory is that Mandy came to Northwest Arkansas. Did we ever figure out what year that was that you came to Northwest
It
Arkansas?
must have been 2016.
So I was 3 years into yoga teaching, and it was right before I bought Yoga Story.
That was exactly at the time, as I
Yeah,
recall. Hmm
yeah, I'd just taken it over, and I was
hmm
like, well, I better get some training on something more than just power.
hmm
And just so happened that you popped up at a teacher training in Fayetteville at Trailside, and so I took her Yin yoga teacher. It was a weekend, so it was something that impacted me obviously enough to where I reached out to you again. I was like, "Hey, are you still doing these? I'd love for you to come to Northwest Arkansas." Now, while I don't teach a regular Yin class, I still continue to use the concepts that I was taught. And I also think we also lead yoga teacher trainings at the studio. And I think it's very important if you're going to lead a yoga teacher training, you need to be trained in Yin so that you can speak intelligently to the difference between power yoga, Yin, restorative, and the tissues. Anyway, well, I'm sure we'll get into that kind of those topics a little bit later. But Mandy, I'd love to ask my guests first off, what is your yoga story? So how did you come to begin to practice yoga and or yin yoga, how whatever your path was? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on. It's really cool to reconnect with you. And I'm so happy to hear that some of those concepts have still remained in your teaching, even though you're not doing yin, which is one of the things that I think is really special about this training is it really can apply to any format. And I'll talk a little bit more about the training if you want to and how that's possible. But I'm really happy to hear that. That makes me very satisfied to know. And also, I'm going to apologize a little for my voice. I have a little bronchitis. I'm getting over a cold, so I sound a little funky, but and I might cough occasionally. But so my yoga story is so the first time I actually did yoga was in college. I was doing my bachelor's degree and we had to have a PE credit. At the time, I was doing a bachelor's degree in music. I was actually an opera singer for a while before I got into yoga. And I took a yoga class for my PE credit, and I took it with my roommate. And she was like so beautiful and elegant and flexible, and I was a mess. I was like, why can't I do any of this stuff? I just didn't like it. I'm terrible at this. So,
Oh,
but
that sounds
then,
interesting because a lot of people get into yoga because they are flexible or good at
Mhm.
it.
Well, yeah, I remember she would do like Upavishta Konasana or the dragonfly we call it in yin, and she would have her chest on the floor, and I'd be sitting there like just trying to sit up straight, and I was so jealous. And but so years later, I was actually getting a divorce. I had a 1.5 and a 3-year-old. It was a very, very stressful time. It was a pretty terrible situation that I had been in and was getting out of. And with two little kids, and I was kind of putting together work in music, I would have the kind of hours where I was home with them during nap time. My anxiety was through the roof. And I thought, let me try to get back to yoga. Everybody says yoga is really great for stress relief. Um, and so when they were napping, I would go on online. This was back in 2005. So like the very early days of online yoga. And it was actually not a YouTube, it was like a website called, I think, Yoga Today.
Mhm.
And I still think of those three original teachers on there as some of like my most impactful teachers. They had such a big influence on me. Um, so yeah, I would do yoga, online while they were napping. And I realized that I actually really did love it. And that maybe I didn't have that competitive thing with my roommate. And so I could just like do my own practice. And it helped me immensely with my anxiety level. And so after a couple of years, I decided to go do a teacher training. So I went to White Lotus in Santa Barbara with Ganga White. I left my kids for 2 weeks. Their grandparents watched them, and I got to just have like this transformative experience in this ashram just outside of Santa Barbara, and it was life changing for me, for sure. And their style is definitely like they sort of think of themselves, Tracy Rich and Ganga White, as sort of the originators of vinyasa. They were originally Ashtangis. They were back, with the Norman White and the Hawaii, era, and sort of developed this style called Vinyasa Flow. And um, yeah, it was transformational. So I got back. I didn't plan on teaching, but I thought I've never done yoga in a yoga studio before at that point. I'd only done it online. So let me go and see what it's like. And then, pretty soon, oh, you did teacher training, come teach for us. And so that's kind of how I started teaching way back in, I think I started teaching in 2008. And so then, yeah, it just was my life. And I was still working as a musician and still had those little kids. And eventually in 2010, I kind of put up my shingle. I taught in a community center. 2012, I opened a studio, Sound Method Yoga, which I owned until February of this year. The studio closed in February. Um, so that's my yoga story. And it's gone from the alignment-based yoga, like can I do a handstand? Can I do an arm balance? More physical practice, really rejecting the spiritual practice, and moved over the years from physical to definitely not maybe more of a spiritual practice for me, but more of a mindfulness practice. And in that way, maybe more spiritual. Um, And definitely for me, quite divorced from like the alignment based vinyasa flow that I originally learned, and more into a more somatically dominant, somatically sovereign kind of practice, which really incorporates now a lot of somatic work and nervous system regulation, things like that.
I think that's one of the things that I really enjoyed most about the training with you is that talking about the science behind these things,
Mm.
how these things work, and while it might feel mystical or spiritual in our bodies, there's a reason why. And I feel like personally, anything that I do with my body is a spiritual practice.
Mm.
So the things that I put into my body, the way that I treat it, if I'm treating it well, or I like to say it's shit your yoga teacher says, and you're raising your vibrations. Those things that we do to raise our energetic vibrations, but it's literally just to me, it's my spiritual practice is taking care of my body, getting enough sleep and those kinds of things. So yoga to me became my spiritual practice because of the feeling that I got, the regulated nervous system, the
Mhm.
ability to breathe deeper and more fully, the way that we can kind of treat things, imbalances in the body with some of this physical practice, whether it be the more energetic alignment based or the more yin focused and based things. But we don't just come and say, oh, it works because it works.
Mhm.
Just don't, it works.
Don't ask too many questions.
Yeah, don't ask too many questions.
Don't look behind the curtain. God forbid.
Which is where you get the abuse of power. But that's what I
Yeah.
appreciated about your teacher training when we did the Yin workshop weekend, was that you brought in a lot of that science behind why this works in the body. And that was also the first time I'd ever heard about fascia. I think I'd heard a little bit, like a little, at least in more in depth. My
Okay.
teacher training, because I went in 2013 to yoga teacher training. I think they showed us like the Gil Headley video,
Okay.
the Mr. Gill out there talking about fascia. But that was pretty much the only piece that we got. So when you were talking more about fascia and what it was like and how when you break it down, it's wetter than water, those types of
Mhm.
points, that was about the first time that I'd been exposed to fascia. Anyway, getting a little bit off track here, but I would love.
That's really good to hear. And I want to talk a little bit about that science portion. So I'm a science nerd. I love reading research. I'm reading research review. I just was reading one right before this call, research review on headaches and strength and conditioning for the neck muscles,
Nice.
right? Like I love this stuff. And it's interesting that you mentioned Gill because I'm also an anatomy geek. I love anatomy, but not so much like the vocabulary of anatomy, but I actually, for the last 3 years, have spent a week in the cadaver lab, which
Uh,
happens to be Gill's lab.
yes.
So, I actually have met Gill.
Oh.
Oh, here, hold on. I'm very proud of this. So
This is
I was
yoga teacher
there as the pro
fangirling.
section. I was there on the pro section team on my second lab, which is a very backbreaking, painstaking, thankless job. And so Gil was there working on his nerve project. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the nerve project. He toured all over the country. It's really phenomenal work. But he came up and he's like, "Wow, you guys, there was only two of us on my cadaver. You guys are so great. You spent all this time. This was a really hard cadaver. Good for you." And he pulled out of his pocket this patch. It says Somanaut, explore dedicated to exploring inner space.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I'm a little bit of a fangirl. I'm a little Gil Headley fangirl. I'm not
I
gonna lie.
Can you do
So
the heart
I was like, like I keep this next to my desk. I love this thing. So
dance?
anyway, that's my story about Gil. He really is a lovely man and just doing like such crazy, cool, interesting work for people like us, who like to bridge the spiritual with the scientific. Right. His whole thing is integral anatomy. So not just looking at the discrete anatomical parts, like, oh, how does this muscle work? What does this joint do? But how does this joint work in connection with the hand, the neck? How does it work with your eyesight, with your nervous system? How does it work with your ancestral trauma, right? Like
Wow.
everything.
Yeah.
That's integral anatomy. And it's such an interesting way of looking at the body. It's been really, really influential for me too because he was also my first sort of education about fascia. Because you can't learn about fascia without running into Gill, right?
Yeah.
And so both the applied anatomy study that I've done in the lab and also, all of the cool work he's done in other, great researchers like Carla Secco, for example. I mean, we know so much about how important fascia is to our experience of being human. And so that's something that I really like to bring not just into this training, but also into my work, also my own practice, my own movement practice, and the work I do with my clients. It's so interesting and so all-encompassing.
Well, I want to kind of go back to something that you said there because it sparked a memory from that training that I took with you. And I want to get clarification because whenever I do yoga teacher trainings, I try to remember exactly what you said. And you may not remember. You may be like, Lynn, I never said that, but I'm pretty sure it was you about the fascia is potentially the physical manifestation of our subconscious within our body.
Hmm.
It was something to that effect.
That's interesting. The
Perhaps
manifestation of our
it
subconscious.
was something along those lines that basically and it kind of referring to that ancestral trauma and
Yeah.
things like that that have happened, that it's part of our subconscious basically physically in our body.
Mm.
So when we're
Mm.
unconsciously tensing up, that's sending messages into the fascia and the fascia's tensing up. So that kind of.
Well, from a nervous system perspective, like from a neuroanatomical perspective, we're starting to see the research of I'm another fangirl also of A.D. Craig, Bud Craig. He's a neuroanatomist and who passed away a couple years ago, but his whole work and the work of others is really demonstrating for us that thinking and emotions doesn't happen in our brain, it actually happens in our body, right?
Yeah,
We
right.
have a sensation, we have these small fiber, C fiber nerves that are sending a constant stream of information from the fascia specifically, but other tissues as well. into the brain, and then the brain is interpreting that data, and the output is the emotion. The
Mm,
output is the behavior.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, consciousness and fascia are connected, right? I
Yes.
mean, we know this as yogis. We understand the body and the consciousness are the same. And I think that's the work of integral anatomy too, which is telling us that we don't have this dualistic view like the Descartes, I think, therefore I am, right? It's all connected. The body and the emotions and the behavior are a unified, embodied experience.
Yeah. So how did you go from this more alignment, physical based yoga into more of this nervous system yin
Mm.
focused niche, as we were kind of talking before we started the podcast, having this as your area that you want to explore?
So there's a couple things. The first one is that after teaching for so many years, thousands of classes, usually, I was teaching a lot of vinyasa, but also a lot of yin for many years, lots of 200-hour teacher trainings, yin trainings. I was bored.
Mhm.
I was tired of it. And I think this happens to all teachers at some point, and most teachers just end it. They're just, I don't teach yoga anymore, you know? That wasn't an option for me. I owned a yoga studio. So that was one thing. But then probably the bigger factor was that I developed a chronic pain issue.
Mm,
And what I realized was that that very strict adherence to alignment, this idea that if you have correct alignment, you're inherently safe, that symmetry equals safety, symmetry is correct, that was actually really contributing on multiple levels to my pain, right? I'm not saying that those things caused pain for me, but that adherence to shapes and ways of moving were really not great for me physically. It wasn't great for my nervous systems. It was feeding into a pretty serious perfectionistic and people-pleasing tendency that I have, right? So all of those things, right? There's that embodied, right? Yeah, you hear that a little bit? All
yeah.
of those things were really kind of feeding into what ended up being a pretty serious chronic pain issue, which actually developed maybe a year or so before I ended up at Trailside in Fayetteville. And at that time, I was suffering tremendously and did all the things, right? Did all of the physical therapy, did all of everything I was told, spent thousands of dollars, thousands of hours, probably, with only getting worse. And then we were going to talk about this anyway, I think, was some of my credentials. So my first teacher training, 200 hours with Tracy White and Tracy White and Ganga White and Tracy Rich. Got it.
There you go.
Um, in 2020, I did because I'm a science nerd, and so I had discovered Jules Mitchell. Read Jules Mitchell, her great book on yoga biomechanics, fell in love with it, thought this is it. This is my teacher because I love the science. I love the evidence-based practice. And 2020, obviously, that's a year that many of us remember for various reasons.
Yeah.
Um, my pain was flaring. It was pretty bad. It wasn't supposed to be an in-person training. Guess what? It ended up being virtual, which worked pretty well for me, actually. But Jules not only pulls the science in and the biomechanics and all of that, but also pain science education, somatics. And that was my first exposure to a different way of thinking about yoga. And from there, I was sold. So I started doing lots of somatic education with various different teachers. At that time, you could study with anybody because it was all online, like
Yeah.
all of these Feldenkrais practitioners who were so well regarded. And I also did a 10-month pain science mentorship um, with my mentor, Neil Pearson, who's up in Canada. Um, and that was like a new career trajectory for me, but it was also when I discovered how to use my practice to actually help me to manage my pain instead of it being sort of a catalyst
Mm.
for my pain. Um, yeah. So everything I do now is really oriented toward people who live with chronic pain.
Yeah, that's
It's
great.
become such a passion of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also though have your certification strength and conditioning specialist.
Mhm.
So why did you fit in as another, personal trainer as well? Why did you feel that was important to get that?
So I, as like a diehard yogi for years, had really rejected like the fitness world,
Hmm.
like, oh, all we need is yoga. Um, and I'm like a little embarrassed to say that now because now it's like my life, the whole fitness world. Um, but so as yoga teachers, if you've been working privately with students, you have had an experience, 100% guaranteed. I can tell you that you've had an experience with someone who's living with pain. Every yoga teacher has, but especially if you work privately with people, because people don't go to private sessions to get better at yoga. I mean, I've had maybe two in my decades, right?
Right.
By and large, people come to private sessions with a yoga teacher because I have this pain, it's tight, show me some stretches. That's the script,
Right.
right? So we're dealing with pain all the time. So I've been dealing with pain since I started teaching private sessions in 2008. Not feeling particularly confident, but weirdly, people felt better when they regularly came to private sessions, right? And I thought, oh gosh, I need to know more about the body. So I'm diving into all this anatomical stuff and learning about it. Um, but it wasn't until I discovered like pain science, neuroscience education that I realized I don't really need to know more about the body to help people with pain. I need to know more about pain and the holistic experience that is pain. So even though I'd been working with people in pain for quite some time, they were coming to me for pain specifically. I was getting sent friends and family and referrals. It wasn't until 2020 in the pain science mentorship when I really felt like I know what I'm doing. I have a process for helping people that reliably works based on all of this other stuff. But what I found was people got better. They did 2, 3, 4 months. They started getting better. They were able to go for walks again. They were able to drive their car again. They were able to do the housework again and play with their kids again. But after 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, they came back because it was one thing to get out of pain, to restore those movements that they had been avoiding back to their lives, but it was entirely another to maintain that or to even exceed that level of function. And so the missing piece for me was strength. And yoga teachers, we work with strength, right? But like I didn't really feel like I had the credentials or understanding to really help someone to, progressively overload, right? To program in ways that were going to be beneficial for someone who's overcoming a pain issue. And so I did a personal training certification, did nutrition certification, and eventually I'm like, let's just do the certified strength and nutrition or strength and conditioning certification because I love to learn. So why
Yeah.
not? Why not?
Yeah.
Um,
I can appreciate
yeah.
that.
And it's been great. I mean, 90% of my clients go from, barely can walk, do housework, XYZ, to eventually being in the gym with me. Because it starts with bringing movements that are feared out of context, sort of rediscovering them in the body in non-threatening situations. And it eventually moves over a period of time and with a very careful, customized process to let's load this movement,
Yeah.
right? Let's make sure this movement is incredibly strong, super resilient. And then while we're there, why not work on other fitness things too, right? Like maybe you really want a nice, strong deadlift, or maybe you have physique goals, or maybe you run and you really need to do strength and conditioning for running. So it's all of those different things, and really strength is like the binder
Yeah.
for all of that. And so important, I think, in a pain care process, pain care journey.
Well, and as we were kind of talking before, again, before the podcast started, is as we get older, adding in that strength component of it is it's how you age powerfully as
So
opposed
true.
just I had a client of mine, and I still work with her. She's almost 50 years old, but we used to say we don't want to age gracefully, we want to age powerfully,
Mhm.
because as women, especially when we age, we begin to lose our muscle mass as our hormones start to shift. But it's literally been one of the few things that consistently is said over and over again, that if you'd like to have quality years in your life, is you add some sort of resistance training in to your fitness or movement regimen. And
Yeah.
so I really love how the two work together. And a lot of times people come to yoga saying, oh, it's just stretching. And while yin is a more stretch based type of practice, adding in the two balance, which of course as a yoga teacher, everything's all about balance, really creates that holistic way of healthcare, healthcare
Mm.
for our bodies. So I really love it.
Actual healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah, actual healthcare. And then the third component being what we put in our mouths. But
Yeah.
so even if, like, for me, I don't necessarily teach a yin class. My regular classes on the schedule are power, because that's just it's how I am. It's how I show up. And if you put me on the schedule with a yin class, people are going to go, Lynn, teaching yin. But so even if, say we're talking to a room full of power yoga teachers and we're trying to tell them why you should add this training into your knowledge base, what would you tell them?
Oh man. I mean, it's all about balance, right? The yin and the yang. Um, Gosh, when I was younger too, though, I only wanted to do vinyasa. I didn't want to do all that restorative,
Yeah.
meditate. Ugh.
I know I need it. I know I need to go to yen.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as I've gotten older, and also as like my regulars, right? The people who've been practicing with me for 10, 15 years, as we've gotten older, we've definitely started to appreciate a a practice which is more mindful. And I think for me, it really comes down to that nervous system regulation. And like in yoga, we're all about health, right? I mean, yeah, we like poses and shit, but we really, as teachers, we want our students, our community to be healthier,
Mhm.
right? Overall stronger, more resilient, more robust. And for
Well, and I would
me,
add too.
yin is such a vehicle for overall health, for that nervous system regulation. Like we know that our students are struggling. We're all struggling, right? We're struggling with anxiety. We're struggling with perfectionism. We're struggling with burnout. A lot of us, we're talking about our age range in our 40s, right? I mean, we're sandwiched between parents and children, and it's just like being in a vice that's tightening at all times. Um, So, yeah, it's great to lift weights. It's great to get plenty of fiber and protein. It's, great to do your power yoga, but also we need to learn how to regulate. We got to sleep better. Um, we have to learn tools for managing our really frazzled nervous systems. So, I think even if you're never planning to teach a yin class, you're like, I'm power all the way. First of all, as you get older, you may find that that changes, right? But also understanding and having tools to help your students to regulate their nervous systems, to help them to achieve a more embodied parasympathetic state so that they can start to make other beneficial changes in favor of their health. Isn't that why we're here? Isn't that why we teach yoga?
Right.
Right? So it's
Yeah.
just another tool in the toolbox. The other piece of that too is that what I've noticed over the many years of doing 200-hour teacher trainings and yin teacher trainings is that people really struggle with sequencing. It's really, 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 it takes a lot of time and skill to actually learn how to sequence well and not feel like an imposter with your sequences, right? They struggle with sequencing, but they also struggle with theming, right? They struggle with that little extra, that zhuzh that you provide in the class, that little theme that gives somebody something to work on throughout the week, right? Something that they can embody in their practice and then bring off the mat.
Mhm.
And so my training includes always included a section on sequencing. So you understand how to put these poses together so that you can make an impact. Not just so you can, oh, we did back bends, right? No, how can I make an impact? How can I make sure that my person feels more comfortable, more alive, sleeps better when they get home after class? And also, how can I make it that much more special for them so that they're learning that these embodied morsels of learning can be taken into any aspect of life. And I think yin is the perfect vehicle for that, but we can do it in any practice.
Yeah.
Um, so
I
yeah,
would.
and also understanding tissue behavior. So
Yeah.
the bit the
That's what I was going to say. I would say that if you're a power yoga teacher, I think needing to understand, I mean, hopefully your 200-hour, the your 200-hour teacher training taught you the difference between, dynamic stretching and static stretching and, the passive stretching. But to safely sequence so that you're not taking people right away too deeply into the tissue in the first part of a power class and allowing them to warm that tissue up and then get deeper in. It can also as well help when teachers, we know that there's a certain hierarchy in earnings when you teach public classes versus when you teach workshops. A lot of people
Mm,
earn more amount when you teach a workshop that you can use some of this training to fold into your offerings so
yeah,
that have like a richer niche of which you can offer to people. And
so true.
I've trained with you. I've trained with Tiffany Cruikshank, where she's brought in the myofascial release aspect into her trainings. And now I will occasionally, when I have time to, do a hips workshop where we'll start with some of that just gentle warm up of the body, a little bit of myofascial release in the
Mm,
hips, and then get into that deeper yin type of stretching at the end, and then lay them down in shavasana, do some sound bowls to really help with that release. It's like 75 minutes to sell out every
it
time because
sounds amazing. It sounds
right.
so good.
Because
Yeah.
they're like, oh, well, it won't be just stretching the whole, they feel like, oh, well, we'll get some movement in. Because that's part of this, our culture that's always like go, go, go all the
Mm,
time. They feel like if they're going to pay for something, they got to be moving. I got to
yeah.
burn calories. I got to weigh
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But they get that hook in, and then they get the benefit of the nervous system relaxation at the very end. But to go back to what you were saying, in this frazzled culture, we're over scheduled, we're over social media, we're constantly stimulating our nervous system to learn how to actually regulate the nervous system with a yin practice. And I always tell people that it's different than just laying on the couch and watching Netflix and zoning out. That's not relaxing your nervous system.
True.
True nervous system regulation is done with practice.
Mhm.
So that's what I personally love about yin,
Me
and
too.
having it as part of my knowledge base, even if I don't teach it on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, the versatility. I mean, there's so many things in that, but like a big part of so the training that we're going to do at your studio is in two modules. The first module is completely online. It's all the science. It's stuff that you want to watch the video a couple times and digest. Um, but a big part of that is tissue behavior. Like
Mhm.
we've been stretching these tissues for a long time. Should we understand what the mechanism behind that is? Like what's actually happening in these practices? How do tissues respond? What is the nature of the tissue? And how can we, quote, target what we're trying to activate better based on science, based on information? Like anybody can use that information. That's
Yeah.
really important. But also, like you said, the versatility of that. Like I do one or two yoga retreats every year. I host yoga retreats. My last one, I was just saying, is in Croatia for 10 days. They don't want to do a power yoga class all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Like you got vinyasa, you got yin, right? That versatility really opens up your income potential, I think, also
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
teacher.
Well, now you've said somatics a couple of times through the podcast. And I've noticed on social media it's a big buzzword.
Yeah.
Somatic, but
Mm.
it's a real thing. It's not just a word that people use. So tell us a little bit more about what somatics is and how you incorporate it into this training.
So yeah, somatics is really buzzy right now, and it has a lot of different meanings. I mean, I think ultimately the overarching concept of somatics is that it is uh, movement which targets the somatic nervous system, right? The part of the nervous system which plans movement, executes movement, considers movement, right? That's a kind of squishy, right? Some people are using somatics for like trauma stuff. Some people are using it for, they got this dance and all these other, there's tons of different things.
Yeah.
So the somatic work that I primarily do is based on Feldenkrais method. Although there are other traditions that I also bring in as well. I'm not a certified Feldenkrais practitioner, mostly because I don't have $40,000 in 4 years to spare. But also because I don't necessarily exactly right. I don't necessarily love the dogma of Feldenkrais, but there are specific concrete concepts which I teach in this training. We have a unit on somatics. Concrete concepts that can be beautifully integrated into any kind of practice. So the type of somatics that I teach I explain it this way. We have thousands, millions, maybe even billions of movement traditions which are devoted to the musculoskeletal system, right? To the muscles, the bones, the tendons, this fascia.
Right. Hmm.
Somatic movement is a movement tradition which is devoted exclusively to the nervous systems, to the way that we learn movement, to the way that movement becomes patterned, to the way that movement becomes linked to, for most of my clients, pain. Some people, memories, trauma, right? I don't really dive into the trauma stuff. I don't have training there. That's not a particular interest of mine. But it's a completely different way of thinking about movement. And for me, it's really integral to how I teach yin as well. So somatic movement is going to look like typically, if it's Feldenkrais oriented, a lot of repetition,
Okay.
a lot of play, a lot of purposeless movement, which gradually goes from a more isolated type of movement or joint articulation, for example, to something much more global. And it is a bit of an art to sort of compose a lesson which brings someone from a place of relatively low skill, maybe fear around a specific movement, all the way to a very satisfying experience of a movement that feels really great and global and fulfilling. So that's how I use somatics.
That's uh, a really great way to put that. Probably the only person that I've heard like actually be able to articulate what somatics is. And
because, I mean, everybody has a different thing. So it could be totally different the next person you ask, for sure.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's important for people to understand and hear, as opposed to just kind of walking into something like, oh, well, this is gonna heal my trauma because I'm dancing around in a room with no purpose. And it's like, well, there's specific methodologies and specific reasons why you do certain somatics. That's
Absolutely. Mine is always going to be more oriented toward pain, which is good news because 60% of the students in your classes have a pain issue.
Mhm.
So I also infuse a fair amount of nervous system education, a little bit of pain science education into my training, just because we're all working with people with pain.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what would be one thing if you were to encounter somebody on the street? What would you want that stranger to know about their body?
Oh, that's such a good question. Here's what I would shout from the rooftops. It's that you are a biological entity. The dharma of biology is to adapt. Biological entities adapt. We can't help it. We are adapting machines. What do we adapt to? We adapt to applied stress, like in the example of strength training, right? We continually stress a muscle, body part, group, whatever, joint over and over and over until it adapts. It gets stronger. Now we can lift more. Now sometimes we have a hypertrophic effect where we have larger muscles. So we expect that in strength training. We don't necessarily expect that in yoga, right? I think still a lot of people think, let me just wail on my hamstrings in this one yoga class so I can get more flexible. What we don't understand is that we're actually asking our bodies also to engage in an adaptive process and stretching as well, which is why we do it over a period of time. And in Yin, we employ a very specific style of practice, which is duration based. And so we need to know how to apply duration for optimal adaptation. So that's what we're learning in this training. But in general, what I want people to know is your body is adapting. It's going to adapt to a couch potato if
Yeah.
that's what you teach it. It's
Mhm.
going to adapt to a iron triathlete, right? If that's what you apply. It's
Mhm.
the right amount of stress with sufficient rest creates optimal conditions for adaptation. And think of adaptation as a proxy for healing. You can't help but heal. Your body heals, period.
Right.
It's your dharma. The question is, are you giving the right inputs? And that can be difficult. That's why we go to yoga teachers. That's why we go to pain care coaches, so that we are applying the right kind of stimulus to adapt the way that we want to. Because that's a little bit harder to figure out sometimes.
Yeah. I say something very similar to my clients when they come in, they do 30 minutes with me and they have their goals. They have it for personal training. They have their goals, they have their issues. You know, this is what I want to target, and that's what you've paid me to do. So that's what we do. And then I will often say, here's what I also observed, and I would like for you to work on this, usually stretching
Yeah,
in our
yeah.
time away from one another. And they come back and I say, did you work on these other things? And they were like, no, I didn't have time to. And I say, you know, what we do within these 30 minutes is only going to affect certain things, but it's what you do with the rest of your time that is the majority of what you're dealing with in your body, is what you've done
Mhm.
with the rest of your time. And so if you're not creating if you're not getting your hip flexors unlocked, or your inner thighs to open up, then you're still going to squat with straight hips, and your knees are going to go over your toes, and you're going to continue to have pain in your knees if we can't get you into the correct position. Now we can spend the 30 minutes that you've paid to do strength training to do stretching, but that's not what you paid to do. And
Right.
yeah. So same thing
Sounds
though.
like an opportunity to sell another 30-minute session. I
Yeah.
don't know.
So same question, but to yoga teachers. What is one thing you wish yoga teachers knew about teaching yoga? If just from it can be from a global standpoint or a more specific feedback aspect.
You know what I always tell my 200-hour people and my yin training people is that we're all so unique. We all have a special voice in this practice. We have something new and fresh and important to say and to offer. Um, I think a lot of times we get into this, well, I'm not like this teacher. We feel like we have to mimic our own teachers. But for me, like, I mentioned the perfectionistic and the people pleasing and how all of those things were feeding into my pain issue. I think once I figured out that I really just needed to be myself, I needed to do me. And to do me, I actually had to step away from traditional yoga practice. A lot of people wouldn't consider how I teach to look very much like yoga. One of my good friends and students calls me the Stephen King of yoga. She's like, it's just weird. I don't know. And I'm like, this is just who I am.
I
But
like
once I
it.
leaned into that, right, that was when it really started to come together for me. And that was when I figured out that I could make a pretty good living doing this.
I
So,
tell my 200-hour people that people can copy just about anything that you put out there, but nobody can copy you
mhm.
and who you are as a person.
Yep. So yeah, find that thing. For me, it was science, it's evidence,
Hmm.
right? And it's a really, really almost unhealthy obsession with pain. But like, but for me, like that's what really makes me special as a teacher and what keeps people, helping me to make a living doing this. And
Yeah.
for other people, it might be other skills, but there's always something about you, just even thinking outside of the yoga world that you could bring into practice.
Yeah.
That's my advice.
Love it. Love it. Well, it's just so I've got all the letters behind your names here. I'll let everybody know Mandy is an ERYT 500 CSCS and certified pain care aware. Her training, which will be held here in Yoga Story in Bentonville, Arkansas, is September 26, 2025 through September 29th. We'll have her in the studio Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday and Monday morning. We have an early bird special until the mid-August of $825 for the training. Otherwise, it'll be $900. Like she mentioned, the first module is online so that you can get through those science videos and rewatch them if you need to. And then module 2, which will be the dates that I just mentioned in studio, is in person, and the get 45 Yoga Alliance CEUs. We could get all of them at once. Yoga teachers, you have to get 30 every 3 years.
Hmm.
They come in for a weekend / Monday morning immersion, get them all wiped out for your
Hmm.
next years. That's what I'm gonna do. So,
Yeah.
and and learn something a little bit different if you're a vinyasa style teacher, or deepen your knowledge of yin teaching if you are more of a yin teacher. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add, Mandy, before we say goodbye?
Just a big thank you to you for having me. That was a really fun conversation, and I am really, really excited to spend more time with you and also with your community in September.
Me too. All right. Well, for Lynn here signing off for Yoga Story Express, thank you so much, Mandy, for joining us. And we hope that if you are a yoga teacher, you will sign up for this training. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.